Guys, it's Reynad back, and today I have the part 1 of my Grand Tournament review. So, Blizzard just announced the next expansion for Hearthstone today, and I have kind of here in front of us the list of cards that we saw in their big live announcement thing that they had up in San Francisco. So I'm kind of going to go through the cards one by one, give my first impressions of them, and just kind of remember that until you see every single card in the expansion, it's really tough to say what will and won't be good, because a lot of these cards will have combos with other cards that are released later that aren't immediately evident, and there are a lot more subtle things as well. Like, until I see what the average 2-drop will look like, for example, in the metagame following the expansion, it's tough to evaluate like how good some of the early game creatures are here, because you don't exactly know how well they're going to stack up. So anyway, just to start it off, Lock and Load, probably like the most exciting card that they revealed, and for good reason. This is actually one of the rare times that a card that looks broken is legitimately broken. This is not like Feign Death, where everyone thinks it's good, and I say it's terrible, and they'll call me dumb, and then it ends up being underwhelming. This card like legitimately looks insane because it is. This might be so powerful that it just becomes the new form of Hunter, and the Lock and Load lists, just to put it in perspective, like will look very different from standard Hunter. Hunter's in a spot right now where you just kind of put a mixture of like dudes and spells that happen to work well together, and then it just kind of has this proactive game plan backed up by its hero power, where you want to vomit a bunch of stuff on the table and go face as soon as you lose the board. So it's an inherently very good strategy, because if you ever do gain board control, the amount of free damage that you get makes it almost impossible to lose, even if your opponent gets it back from you. But Lock and Load's a completely different deck, actually. It's not like trying to vomit a million creatures on the table and use that to get a bunch of free damage off. Lock and Load Hunter is a lot more like the Hunter decks before Undertaker and before Web Spinner that were actually defined by Starving Buzzard. And that's really the card that this reminds me the most of, is Starving Buzzard. It is a 2-mana combo piece. You want to play it later in the game, like late to mid game. Play it, fill up your hand, just keep going off. So Lock and Load is what it's going to take to get tracking back in the metagame, and I expect tracking to be, of course, a 2-of in any Lock and Load deck. And it's going to be a card that like people actually start to complain about, because it's easy to forget the kind of consistency that it gives a combo-based Hunter deck when the card's been out of the metagame for so long. But I mean, if you could imagine a card like Tracking for a deck like Patron, that's a lot of what this is going to feel like. So Lock and Load, super powerful card. We're going to see the return of Double Hunter's Mark, which is going to incidentally make a lot of mid-sized creatures without Death Rattle a lot worse. Things like Hungry Dragon, which already aren't seeing much play, but things like Shield Master, some of the creatures that are revealed later on here in the Grand Tourney. Basically, like, Death Rattle becomes even more important once you start seeing more cards like Hunter's Mark being prevalent in the metagame. Yeah, that's kind of my feelings on this card. Very, very good, like 9 out of 10 good. Will probably make a new Hunter archetype, and whether that archetype is better than just like a more traditional Hunter list, we'll see. Because playing Lock and Load is going to force you to play cards like Tracking, force you to play cards like Arcane Shot. But it's not really being forced. Like, Tracking is a great card. It's just not played in Hearthstone much, because unlike in a game like Magic, you don't need to use cards like Tracking to hit your mana crystals. And it's really only good for finding 2-card combos, which we're finally going to have in the metagame again, at least in Hunter. Let's move on. Maiden of the Lake, it's part of the new like use your hero power theme that they're pushing in this set. 2, 6, or 4, those are like reasonable stats. It's less total stats than something like Chillwind Yeti. Personally, I don't like this card very much, and the reason is that I don't think it stacks up well against Piloted Shredder and other cards that define the 4-drop slot. It's just, the stats are passable. They're fine, but it's like if you get one activation of Maiden of the Lake off, if it's alive for 1 turn, it netted you 1 mana. And sometimes you would rather just play a follow-up 5-drop instead of using your hero power and playing a second 4-drop. So yeah, it gives you some flexibility. It can do some crazy 3-card combo things with expensive cards like the new Mage Dragon that we're going to go over. But I really don't see this card as being set defining. If you play 2 Maiden of the Lakes, it does not make your hero power cost 0. If I understood that correctly in the announcement. So if you play 2 of these, your hero power still costs 1. Yeah, so it's just not the most exciting card. Next is Champion Sarat. It's like another card that's going to give you a lot of value, assuming it lives for a long time. But the 5-mana slot is very competitive right now, with cards like Loatheb and Sludge Belcher. And the interesting thing about Nexus Champion Sarat is that he isn't exactly a 5-drop card. You have to think of him more like a 7-drop, because most of the cards with Inspire, I feel like, with one or two exceptions, you're going to want to play them and use your hero power in the same turn. That way, even if they die, you got your value out of them. So you really have to add 2 mana to the cost of most of the Inspire cards that you're valuing or evaluating, just to kind of see how good they are in most games. There are definitely advantages to being, a 5-mana card over 7, obviously. Sometimes you just throw it on the table and make them kill it, which is definitely powerful. But personally, I don't think that high-value cards like this are the things that you're going to want to be doing in the next metagame. I kind of want to touch on what happens as more and more sets get released, and kind of the reasons for separating different card blocks into formats that games like Magic do. Basically, as you release more and more cards, every deck gets more and more efficient. So anytime I build a Druid deck, for example, I'm going to start by putting 2 Swipes in my deck. I'm going to start by putting 2 Keeper of the Groves in, 2 Ancient Allures. All of these cards that are just so good, and they won't be printing better cards than them. So as you release more and more sets, you get more and more of these cards like Swipe that you're going to automatically put in your deck. And we have already seen a few of these released today, actually, that we'll go over later. So what that means is the metagame gets faster and faster as more cards get released. And there becomes less and less room for these slow, high-value cards like Nexus Champion Sarat or Sneed's Old Shredder. So you'll pretty much always see extremely fast cards seeing more play than the extremely slow cards when new sets get released. So, like I said, this is the reason I'm going to kind of look down a lot of the more expensive cards like this. And we got Cold Dara Drake, which does a lot of cool stuff. We kind of saw it in the live games that Trump was playing. Very cool card. You can use your hero power any number of times. I'm glad to see that they're incorporating more dragons in, because this is going to make cards like Blackwing Corruptor look a lot more interesting moving forward, assuming that this isn't the only dragon in the set, of course. Yeah, I mean, you play it, it's worse stats than Boulder Fist Ogre, and then if it lives a turn, you have infinite hero powers, which if if you're using Maiden of the Lake and you have those 2-card combos going, that's really impressive looking. But again, I just think this is too slow. They're giving every single class these new early game tools with the set, so the aggro decks or the tempo decks are getting more and more efficient, and I just don't think you're going to be able to get away with playing a 6-mana 6/6 moving forward. So personally, I don't think that, at least in the high ranks, this card will see much play. I don't think that Nexus Champion Sarat will see much play. I don't think that Maiden of the Lake will see much play. I mean, maybe this guy and something like Control Warrior could be pretty strong, but probably not. The metagame is just going to be very, very, very fast, and it's not because aggro is broken. It's just because every deck gets more efficient cards, and the most efficient cards tend to be the early game cards and the mid game cards. The Lowly Squire I like a lot. It's a very cool 1-drop. This is one interesting thing that Blizzard has decided to do, because they never decided to nerf the Warlock hero power. They left it as only 2 mana. They left it as draw a card, lose 2 life, rather than lose 3 life. The Warlock hero power kind of changes the way that they can balance every single neutral 1-mana card in the game, which is really funny. It's the reason that we haven't seen a 1-mana Warlock card since ever, since the original expansion. As far, assuming I'm remembering correctly, I think that's what it's been. There hasn't been a single 1-mana Warlock card, and after Undertaker, there's never been another good aggressive neutral 1-mana card. So the cool thing about Lowly Squire is it's a 1-mana card that's it's not good in Zoo, it's not good in Hunter, because you don't want a hero power turn 2. And if you play this and you don't hero power turn 2, then your Lowly Squire is going to die to pretty much anything that was coined out by the other guy or something that he played first. Now, decks where this is a very interesting card is something like Rogue, for example. You play it, you dagger turn 2, all of a sudden you can trade with a Mech Warper if they coin that out. You can trade with just about anything. And it's a very fast card for enabling combos with SI Agent later on. you're not forced to hero power the turn after you play it. Just the fact that you can like threaten to use your hero power pretty much makes your opponent treat it like a 2-attack creature, and that'll affect the plays that they do. So lowly Squire and something like Rogue I think will be very strong. Even in something like Mage is reasonable. I don't know if there will be room for this. But in general, not going to see a lot of play in things like Warlock or Hunter, I would say. I'm pretty sure about that. Because you are sacrificing, you know, playing. I mean, maybe you can play this turn 1, turn 2 you play Mad Scientist and Hunter, and then later on you hero power, but that just seems weaker than most other 1-drops. Yeah, and then Frost Giant. This is actually a pretty good giant. I mean, this is no Clockwork. Like, this is a card that a lot of classes can play. Any deck that's trying to stretch the game out to the mid or late game, this is a really powerful tool. Like, the more I think about this card, the more just powerful it seems in things like Control Warrior. The one tough part about it is like, people are always going to make the big game hunter argument, but the thing is, if I'm trying to use this card as a win condition in Control Warrior, like, the reasons it's good are that later in the game it'll cost like 1 or 2 mana, so I can you know, drop it, kill their stuff, leave it at that, or you know, it'll cost like 4 or 5, or in something like Handlock maybe I would play 1, but that deck already has a lot of slower threats. The thing with Frost Giant is it doesn't get value against BGH. So unlike something like a Ragnaros or a Dr. Boom, if I'm using a deck slot and treating Frost Giant as one of the finishers, one of my ways to win the late game, yeah, I can play it for cheap, but then as soon as they BGH it, like, all of a sudden it puts my opponent right back into it. There's this card that has probably been sitting in my hand for a long time. It just hasn't been doing much up to this point, and if they have the BGH, you really get punished because it takes a lot of time to make this card a good investment. You know, it's not just always going to be like a 4-mana 8/8 like Mountain Giant in Handlock. So definitely a card with a ton of potential. I expect to see a decent amount of this actually in things like mid-range decks. Really tough to evaluate though, because like I said, assuming the metagame gets as fast as I think it will, this card will likely be unplayable for a very long time, and it will take a very specific metagame for it to become strong or popular. And yeah, if that's ever the case, then Big Game Hunter just obliterates this card. Let's go to the cards that were revealed in the show match against the players out in San Francisco. So Fallen Hero, 2-mana 3/2, your hero power deals 1 extra damage. It's a pretty cool card. It gives you a lot of interesting plays like on turn 4 or later on. Like, if you were to think about a 4-mana 3/2 that dealt 2 damage when it came into play to something of your choice, it would be an okay card. I mean, it would be better than Stormpike Commando for sure, which is already like a pretty good place to be, like a 1-mana cheaper card of something that's reasonable in Arena. The question is, like, how good is it if I just want to play it as a 2-drop turn 2? And that's where it's going to stack up poorly against things like Mad Scientist, Haunted Creeper, and Rubian Egg. Anything with Death Rattle really is going to really like crush this card. So I feel like you have the flexibility to drop it turn 2, and then you can make your opponent play in strange ways by threatening to hero power for 2 damage while it's in play. But it's definitely like a reasonably costed card. It's not broken for those people who think it is. It's definitely not unplayable. It's a card that will see some play in tempo-based decks, in decks, of course, that are trying to be built around the mage hero power. But I just don't see those decks as doing that well. Like, the metagame in Hearthstone is so tempo-based. Every single deck in Hearthstone, if you want to know how the game is just played at a high level, everybody fights for control of the early game board. And then as soon as somebody loses the board, 70% of the time they'll lose the game. And the other 30% of the time, they'll have a burst combo to come back and kill the other guy even though they've lost the board. So that's kind of just how the game works. This is why decks like Dragon Paladin aren't good. It's not that they're bad against aggro or anything. It's that once you get control of the board, you don't have burst to end the game quickly, and you don't have a combo when you're behind to kill your opponent out of nowhere. Cards that get you early game board control are so valuable, and why that's always going to be a core strategy in Hearthstone. Play efficient stuff, kill your opponent's stuff, limits their options, and you snowball and win the game. Effigy, when a friendly minion dies, summon a random minion with the same cost. So that's a very cool card. For 3 mana, you're getting a creature that's worse than your average 3 mana creature, because any 3 mana dude that you're going to be putting in your deck is going to be better than Effigy, right? Like, it'll be a 3-drop that does what you want all of the time. So a card like Effigy, it is strong off of Mad Scientist. Like, any secret that gets you a minion in play off of Mad Scientist is strong, and especially because Mage has the strongest secrets. I mean, this is why Mirror is like one of the strongest secrets in the game to get off Scientist. Effigy, because now you have 4 Mage secrets that can get you board control, something like Effigy is so much stronger than Duplicate for getting the immediate board. So unlike the more aggressive Mage decks, it's stronger. Because of that, you might see Kirantor Mage pop up just because Effigy exists. Because now I can play a deck with 2 Mirror Entity, 2 Effigy, and maybe like 1 counter spell or 1 Duplicate or something, and all of a sudden I have like these insane early game plays where I can just coin out Kirantor Effigy past the turn, and it's like my opponent's playing control, they either kill this minion or they, they're just going to take 4 every single turn starting from turn 3. It does kind of suffer from the same problem that Duplicate does, in that there are games where your opponent will like figure out what secret it is, and then they'll be able to just play the game without ever killing your creatures on their turn. And then you're forced to be trading into stuff, and your secrets don't proc on your turn, right? So you can't trade into something on your turn and get the Effigy to happen. So because of that, it definitely limits a lot of its power, but it's still a pretty good card, and you can play things like Defender of Argus or Sludge Belcher to kind of force your opponent to kill your stuff. So I expect to see this in some tempo decks, but it really depends on if there's room for cards like this, because deck slots become a lot more competitive now that there are just more cards in the game. A card has to do a whole lot more to make it in your deck in the first place. Totem Golem, awesome name, awesome card, awesome artwork. This card's nuts. Like, we'll see how big of a deal the Overload is, but it just fights so well against everything early game, at least right now. This is the same thing I said about Spider Tank before the rest of GVG was released. I thought Spider Tank would be good, and because of what the metagame turned into, cards like True Silver and Despite ended up being super popular. And because of that, 3-mana 3/4s were really weak, because your opponent could just coin their 4 damage thing. A card like Piloted Shredder as well, super popular, super high power level, destroys Spider Tank. Totem Golem, right now, before they show any other cards, fights super well against everything. It's like, this is the kind of card that could make Shaman playable, but if they show a bunch of like 2-mana 4/2s or something in the rest of Grand Tourney, then that might completely flip on its head. This card will be strong. Like, it's very unlikely that they make 2-drops that fight this well. It's really unlikely that they make cheap 4-damage weapons. This card will be good, extremely powerful, and it's core part of the new totem strategy of Shaman. Kodo Rider. This card is just too slow. A lot of people are excited for it. It's just too slow. If you play it turn 6, it's only good if you're already winning on board, in which case anything that costs 6 mana is good. If you're behind on board, it's absolutely garbage. You can't play it for 8 mana. You just don't have time in any metagame. Kodo Rider will never see play. Thunder, Bluff, Valiant. Give your totems +2 attack. The 5-mana slot, really competitive. Cards like Loatheb, Sludge Belcher, super powerful. I feel like this is definitely a card with some potential, because like, personally, it's tough to say how good the totem strategy will be until all the totems are released, but 2 of them that they showed are just like the most nuts cards that they've spoiled. So I feel like this might see play just because Tusker Totemic and Totemic Golem are so absurd. Like, so absurd. Those cards are disgustingly good. Anyway, probably not going to see play. I still feel like this card is most likely bad, and the reason for that is I don't like cards that are only good when you're winning on board. Like, a card like Tusker Totemic is going to give you insane value even if you're behind on board for a 3-mana card. Thunder Bluff Valiant is going to be a 5-mana 3/6, because the games that you're losing, people are going to be killing off all of your totems, and that's a big problem. That's the issue with Thunder Bluff Valiant. That's the reason I don't think it'll see too much play. Tusker Totemic, this card, absolutely ridiculous. Like, this is one of my favorite cards that they spoiled. This is exactly what Shaman needed. Not some pile of stats with Overload that messes with your curve. just like a really good value card that has no business existing, but it does, and it's okay because it's Shaman and the class is terrible. And this is exactly the kind of card that Shaman needs, is just legitimately broken independent cards, like Tusker Totemic. So any random totem means that it can be summoning your Totem Golem for way too many stats. It can summon Mana Tide for way too much value. I mean, it's a Mana Tide plus a 3/2. It's nuts. Even if the Mana Tide dies right away, it gains you 3 life. It wasted an attack of theirs. You still have that 3/2 to trade into something of theirs. You drew a card. Something like Flame Tongue, you're going to have to be really careful with your positioning on this guy, just to make sure that your Flame Tongue spawns in the right spot. And yeah, it's just a ridiculous card. I love it. Really, really good. If anything makes Shaman playable, it's this guy. Reynad Totem Carver, gain +1/+1 for each friendly totem. Again, I don't think that going all in on the totem strategy will be too good, but I might be wrong about that because, like I said, Tusker Totemic and Totem Golem are so damn strong, and they're so good that cards like Totemic might even see play, just because getting that early game board control is that important. And if that kind of tempo strategy based around totems does become good, then something like Reynad Totem Carver could be pretty strong. Personally, I think cards like Defender of Argus are going to be way better than something like this. It'll help you out against your aggressive decks. It'll help you in games where you're behind. Something like Defender of Argus, that is. A card like Reynad Totem Carver, it's just, again, it's a pile of stats. Shaman does not need a pile of stats. So I expect Totem Carver to be pretty much unplayable unless the Shaman strategy of going all in on totems is much stronger than I think it is right now. So moving forward, we got Ball of Spiders, 6 mana, summon 3 web spinners. As far as like a value card, horribly slow, and even for Arena, I feel like tempo decks are so good that something like Ball of Spiders will probably be too slow. But for Constructed, it's 100% unplayable. Like, Hunter is one of the most competitive decks when it comes to finding room for specific cards. You don't want to play expensive cards so that your cards like Quick Shot are better. And yeah, Ball of Spiders is just not what the deck wants to play at all. I don't expect us to see any play in Constructed at all. Last but not least, we got Captain Crag with Charge. Costs 1 less for each friendly pirate. I really hope there are more pirates. I love playing that tribe. Super fun. I've got an entire pirate playlist just for when I'm streaming pirate decks. And yeah, I mean, as far as this guy's stats, kind of similar to Doomguard, I guess. He's only really super efficient when you already have a pile of pirates on the board. And again, anytime in Hearthstone that you have multiple creatures in play on your side of the table, you should be winning. So personally, I think this is not, again, it's not what Pirate needs. Pirates needed more cards like Ship's Cannon. That's a hell of a card. It's like a 2-drop that they have to kill, or it just gets way too much value. Captain Crag is just another card that rewards you for having way too many of your vulnerable creatures in play, which should almost never happen at a high level. So it suffers from the same problems that South Sea Captain does, so I don't expect us to see too much play, but definitely an interesting card, and I might be completely wrong about how good it is if they show us a bunch of new pirates, you know, maybe pirates that make, like muster for pirates. That's what this card needs. Now we have a pretty sweet card. So that's what they spoiled here on the release of Grand Tourney. Thank you for watching. As always, this video is brought to you with G2A.com. If you guys want to help us out, help out the team, you know, anytime you're going to buy a game, go there, use the code TEMPO, and yeah, you get a few % off. They do seriously have the best prices for what it's worth. I'll see you guys next time as soon as they spoil more cards, and we'll definitely do a review on those as they get released. So, until then, have a good one.